So in this video I'll be looking at Taylor Swift's song Anti-Hero. This is the first song off of her Midnights album, and for me one of the most interesting to look at in terms of lyrics. It's typical Taylor in that it's introspective and exploring her own self-doubts, but these particular lyrics seem more honest and forthright than maybe we've seen before. In general, the song has some clever use of language because Taylor explores contrasting metaphors and an unusual structure to explore her self-doubt and depression. There's quite a bit going on here, so let's dive in with the first verse. Immediately, Taylor gives us a bit of a paradox here, two things that don't seem to be connected but are. We think that wisdom comes with age, but here she's only seeing herself getting older, not wiser. And midnights becoming afternoons also sounds like a puzzle, because midnight is a time when you may think of someone being awake and worrying about their themselves. However, this worry has consumed her so much that this is now a normal afternoon. It's an interesting start as it gets us thinking about solving these apparent contradictions. Taylor then brings in some personification as she says depression works the graveyard shift. Now the graveyard shift would be round about midnight too, I guess, but this phrase also has clear negative connotations, and she extends this connotation by referring to people she's ghosted in the final line. Ghosting is simply ignoring someone, obviously, but when you combine it with graveyards, the slightly darker and more ominous feel to the diction here. Either way, she feels alone, but ironically also completely surrounded by the memories of those that she's ignored in the past. So moving on to the pre-chorus, Taylor then uses some short, sharp internal rhymes to pick up the pace and move us quickly towards the chorus. The quadruple rhyme of devices, prices, vices, and then crisis gives us pace, but also a heavy rhythm to these three lines. They're also mostly iambic, with an unstressed syllable followed by a heavily stressed second syllable, as that's also where each rhyme occurs. They talk about possibly her time during the pandemic, when she was alone, but also quite creative as she put out a couple of albums. This creativity, though, seems to come at quite a high price, because it leads to these unnamed vices and crises. We then get a triple rhyme in the next section, and here we see Taylor, who's talking in the first person, addressing an unnamed second person for the first time. Using the second person, you, by the way, is very common in pop songs. Here she's imagining a boyfriend who's just had enough of her moods and depression and is planning to leave her. Now, the chorus sees a pretty big shift in terms of structure. She repeats the phrase, "it's me," twice, and the mostly monosyllabic vocabulary changes the tone. It's simple, very to the point, and the "hi, it's me" sounds, to me, almost apologetic. By putting me, I, and me all in the space of two lines, it seems pretty clear where she lays the blame for her problems, and it has this feeling of kind of self-confession. Now moving on, tea time in England at least is a time when families tend to sit down together, eat and talk about the day. So you can imagine her being the topic of conversation at a time like this. I really like the next line in particular. Staring directly at the sun but not the mirror is a great metaphor about light and literally reflection and, I guess, self-reflection. Now looking at the sun is not a good idea, as clearly you're going to get hurt, whereas a mirror can let you see how you really appear. And the fact that Taylor does something more damaging than something potentially useful, I think, is particularly telling. She then seems to show some empathy for her friends by understanding how exhausting and tiring it must be supporting the anti-hero. And here, for me at least, the anti-hero doesn't seem exactly to be like a villain in the normal sense, but maybe it shows that she's not the squeaky clean pop star heroine that many expect her to be. Okay, on to verse 2, and here we maybe get the most interesting line in the song. I feel like everybody's a sexy baby and I'm a monster on the hill. This seems to be an allusion to the TV show 30 Rock, where a character in one episode is particularly sexual. Could also be a couple of other things. It could be a comment on young children and how they're exposed to more sexual imagery in pop music. Or perhaps it's a reference to how Taylor herself is growing older and she's competing with many much younger acts, and she's like the monster on the hill looking in from the outside. That image offers us a big contrast between a baby and a monster, which is obviously far more threatening. Another idea is that she's self-conscious about her size, more literally, because she's around 6 foot tall, nearly 6 foot tall. Now the verb, to look closely at the language here, the verb lurching is an interesting verb because it suggests a very clumsy movement, and it ties in with the image of a monster coming to threaten us. And the final line here suggests someone attacking this monster with an arrow. But of course, the heart returns us to the more obvious romantic and emotional connotations. Now the pre-chorus changes here, but these rhymes remain, this time with a far more complex diction of narcissism, altruism, and very nearly congressman. Some strong sibilants going on there too, which flows the lines together very easily. And narcissism is all about having a strong interest in yourself, but here Taylor says it's covert or hidden by acts of generosity or altruism. In short, she thinks she's a fake. Now Taylor's very rarely political, but here she does at least give us a simile to compare this kind of insincerity to a congressman. And then finally we get to the bridge. Here we see Taylor's troubles are also imaginary, as she has a fictional daughter-in-law to go along with a presumably fictional husband, who is written out of a will. It turns out another of her concerns is perhaps her incredible fortune and how people, even her own future family, may treat her differently because of money. And there we have it, a pretty dense and dark look at life through the lens of Taylor Swift. I hope you liked this particular analysis. If you did, feel free to like, subscribe, or even just suggest another song for me to analyse in the comments. Thanks very much.